Experts and stakeholders in the climate change space have highlighted the urgent need for sustainable development in Africa, emphasizing the need for climate-smart investment. The continent is said to require comprehensive plans to ensure long-term economic and environmental well-being. Joining me for more on this is Marilyn Obaisa-Osula, the head ESG Sustainability and Climate Change at PwC Nigeria. Thank you for joining me today, Marilyn.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be in your midst.
All right. Well, some have classified Africa as the most vulnerable continent on Earth, adding that climate change and climate variability will likely reduce agricultural reproduction, food security, and water security. Is this overstated?
Well, thank you. Before I answer your question, I'd just like to give a bit of context to how I generally see climate change. So, climate change is everyone's concern, and I'll explain why I say this. And simply put, we know that it's caused by the greenhouse gas that science have, explained to us over and over again, that is abundant in our atmosphere. And this gas, they trap heat. And there's a reason why I need to explain this very clearly. And this heat then causes global warming. So I haven't met one person on this planet, so far that hasn't, had one story or the other to say about the effect of climate change to them, right? Having said that, when we now come into Africa, you then get some of the arguments that, if you're saying that the greenhouse gas, is the cause of the climate change and the global warming, then Africa is not guilty because we, as Africa, emit just 3 to 4% of the global greenhouse gas. The interesting thing I must say, Perpetua, about this is that these greenhouse gases do not see the maps, right? They don't see the maps. They don't see that Nigeria starts here and ends here, Africa starts here and ends here, or whatever. They don't see the map. They don't see the boundaries. They move, right? And so the fact that you emit less does not mean that you're not affected. So it's very important I lay this context, that the effect of climate change and your ability to emit or not emit do not really correlate, because you could be more impacted by the effects of climate change. So having said that, to your question, how I see vulnerability as well. Vulnerability to me is very simple, and I think that if countries, continents, subnationals and nationals, and companies and firms are looking at vulnerability this way, they will understand why climate change is important. Vulnerability is, for me, for Africa, is the extent to which we are able to mitigate our climate risk and harness the opportunities within, keeping us, making us to become resilient as a continent, and not only just resilient, we are future-proof, ready for the future. Because I have already established that the effect is here, whether in terms of the risk that you've mentioned, like the food security issues, because that's relatable. Climate is tied to agriculture, or effect on health, like we see with the cooking gas, in the rural areas, and things like that. So whether we see this risk, one thing is very clear that we must look at that there are also opportunities. So vulnerability, for me, is the extent to which you are able to mitigate your risk and harness your opportunities within the climate action, not denying the obvious. Thank you.
All right, I like how that you've talked about two things now: harnessing the potentials and, of course, mitigating our risks. Now, what pragmatic steps must African governments take to mitigate these risks that you have identified?
Oh, very quickly, I would say what comes to my mind are 4 key areas, and then a 5th one that is overarching. The first is energy. Energy, the second, let me just do a list of them, is energy. The second is finance. The third is technology. And the 4th is agriculture and food security. I feel and I believe that if African countries hinge their climate policies around these 4 areas, at least for a start, the impact will be enormous, whether into livelihoods or whether it's businesses that we're trying to stir up and all that. So just a quick deep dive into the energy part. I would say energy is key to drive economy. So whether you will like it or not, it has to be affordable, it has to be accessible, it has to be scalable, and lastly, it has to be responsible. It has to be responsible in the view of the greenhouse emissions. It has to be responsible also in the view of health. So when we look at energy as a whole, it's a new ball game. And most people would then say, but we have fossil fuel based in Nigeria, and in Africa we have a lot of gas. Okay, whether you're going through your transitions through taking gas as a transition product, or doing carbon capture to reduce the carbon intensity of your production, or going green, which we going through the renewables, whatever it is, know for sure that energy products are going to have a lot of competition. It will not just be one product, there will be a lot of products in the energy sector competing for all of us as global citizens. So this is important for those that play in that sector. And then let me dive quickly into finance, like very important. And there are a lot of opportunities within finance that we are not harnessing in Africa under the climate action. If we look at the pledges and we add them to the available funds, we're looking at close to huge billions of dollars available for us to harness. We as Africans need to look at our opportunities, and a few of these has come up. Like in South Africa, they've come up with their sustainable finance taxonomy. Nigeria, we are early adopters of the IFRS, ISSB sustainability standards for reporting, which is to help drive capital flows. We also have, we also have, the Nigerian Climate Change Act, which has hinged the recently announced blueprint, which is blueprint for our carbon markets, which is about 2.5 billion USD. So there's a lot of opportunities within the climate change action. So when people talk about climate change, like already in my conversation, I always say, while we talk about the risk, can we just harness the opportunities that sit in it? We need a lot of financing mechanisms in Africa to do that. We need a lot of banks to become accredited entities of these funds, either as intermediaries or just accredited entities as a whole. And then if you then go to technology, I don't need to talk much about technology. We know it helps us to scale. But I'd like to speak more about agriculture and food security, which a lot of people can relate with. Look, we now have, funny weather patterns. Having a base in agriculture as a person, I sometimes wonder how the farmers are coping. Our rains are not at the times where we were taught when we were in school. And so because of this, we now have technology working with agriculture to help farmers, things like early warning signs, technology that talks about, that helps grow in alternative agriculture, like soilless agriculture, like hydroponics, just things to help farmers cope. So the last overarching area is government. Having looked at finance and energy, agriculture and food security and technology, I think that most of our policies, our climate policies should dive around these areas, because I feel very strongly that these areas will really help us economically, and not only that, it will also show its impact in the livelihoods of our people. Thank you.
All right, you've talked a lot about, harnessing potentials and some of the things that can be done. I was tempted to ask you how much of these have been adopted on a large scale. You talked about agriculture. Do we have it on a large scale? Do we have government funding? Some of these techniques that you've talked about. When we talk about soilless agriculture and all of that, it's probably just pockets of some persons here and there. It's not widespread yet. So how do we, probably begin to achieve that, a situation where it's widespread, it's supported by governments like you talked about, or is the challenge financing? I want us to drive this conversation home.
Yeah, there are two things. I think the main issue, one, is general awareness. I think it's just the awareness is not really there. The education on climate is not very strong. And we in PwC have taken it upon ourselves to do a lot of podcasts and fire chats to educate the people on climate change, because with that, people will begin to see a lot of opportunities. And I will get into the more opportunities later if we have time to discuss that. So that's number one. That is key. Government needs to sponsor a lot of awareness sessions, workshops, seminars, just teaching people, because when you teach people, you can't control the innovation that comes out of what they've learned. That's number one. Number two is financing. And I find it difficult to understand why we worry about foreign direct investment if, in just one direction. We're not looking at it again to the direction of the eye of climate action to drive in foreign direct investment and other kinds of investment into our country, as Nigeria has all the resources that helps us, harness this investment and gain and produce and, impact our GDP, as the case may be. So those are the two things for me that come readily in mind that I think will be at the hurdles. And if government can support, and even private sector can play a critical role in this will really go a long way in building our economy.
All right, talking about energy poverty, which you highlighted earlier, can we probably eradicate that without having to neglect fossil fuel, seeing the campaign for a just transition and, all the endemic, energy poverty we see in Africa? I mean, there is that concern that those who are going to say things like, okay, climate change, is an existential threat, but then the bigger threat is insecurity, the bigger threat is energy poverty and all of this. So how do we probably marry these together, or how do we strike a balance and ensure that we're talking about a just transition for Africa?
Yes, so let me crack a joke, Perpetua. Even with the fossil fuel, do we have full energy accessibility?
No, we don't, and that's the fear that if we decide to switch, we might be overtaken by those who are faster than we are.
So what energy transition will help us do, if we look at it critically and in context of what we're doing, is help us harness more energy options, right? So let's forget about the political debate on it, but it helps us harness more energy options. So we're not just only looking at fossil fuel, we're also looking at other energy options, which are a lot. I mean, there's blue hydrogen, there's, of course, there's green hydrogen, there's the renewables in terms of solar. And the funny thing is that all the resources for the other sources of energy we do have. So it's just for governments to scale up. And, in transitioning, what was clear in COP28 was to say, we transition justly and fairly. So we are going to transition from fossil fuel, whether we are going to use carbon capture to do that, or we are going to use other technology to do that from fossil fuel. What transition simply means is taking that journey in context of development. So you don't just take that journey without development in context of it, but of course thinking responsibly, taking these actions strategically, and also balancing it out as you transition. And really, we should not close our eyes to the other options of energies. I don't know why we are just very fixated on fossil fuel. There are other products, and I believe that in the future, these products will compete very strongly with fossil fuel. So that's how I see it, and I think there are a lot of opportunities really packed into that. And, low carbon economy is also driving a lot of new businesses. And now, like in the circular economy, it's largely formalizing in the informal sector where people are recycling things. That's one. Just to keep it simple. Mm-hmm. There's also the blue economy that most of us have had for the first time, probably because we have a minister that, of the blue economy. There's a lot of value chain that is also there that is lying fallow that people are not harnessing. Then the green economy, which we are all used to, of course, because that speaks to the fossil fuel transitioning. So what I would say to you, Petra, and to the country, is that we shouldn't look at just transition in one perspective. We should also look at it through this perspective of what are the opportunities that can be in there for us.
Thank you so much, Marilyn Obaisa-Osula, Head, ESG, Sustainability and Climate Change, PwC Nigeria. I must say we have a lot more to talk about, but I just have to let you go at this point.